Great, we will start ourselves off. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining on to today's learning event around fostering a one system mindset and culture as part of the project around the impact of care proceedings delays on children's services. As a quick introduction, my name is Morgan Finlayson. I'm a senior consultant with Mutual Ventures, and I will be running the first part of the session today before I hand off to some excellent guest speakers and panelists who will take us through the remainder of the session today. Now, in case you're not aware, this is the fourth in a series of learning events that have been running throughout June. This is the final one in this series, as you can see on the right-hand side. But if you've missed any of the other ones, not to worry at all. All of the recordings and slides are all available. You can see them linked there at the bottom. And once this session has finished off today, the recording and the slides for this event will also be made available, at which point you'll have access to all of these. As you can also see, we have a really excellent list of guest speakers and panelists in today with a mix of presentations and panel speakers that we're going to take you through. As a quick bit of housekeeping and how the session is going to run today, we will be having 10 minutes from myself just to quickly run through some of the findings that this project has produced on examples of good practice and findings around the one system mindset and culture. We'll then be handing over to the chair of the Local Family Justice Board in Teesside, Helen Scowfield, who will be doing a short presentation on how Teesside effectively operates their cross-system cooperation. And then the majority of the session, the main event, will be a panel discussion and Q&A, which will be chaired by Claire Chamberlain today. Please do submit questions through the Q&A function for myself, for Helen, and for the panel throughout this session. We will come to that at the end, and we will feed through as many questions as we are able to in the time allowed. Before I jump into the main body of the findings, I would first like to touch on a quick summary of the project itself, and particularly the activities and the aims and objectives and who we've been engaging with as part of this project. There were two primary objectives from this project, which were firstly, as you can see on the left there, to develop and roll out a financial modelling tool, which was developed to help local authorities understand and quantify the impact that delays have on their services and their children's services. And as a follow-on from that, we were also aiming to engage as widely as we could across the care and judicial systems to develop more realistic cross-system responses to challenges and key issues that led to identified delays. We undertook a series of different activities in order to do this, as you can see on the right. Primarily, firstly, that financial impact modelling tool, but we also developed in-house a benchmarking tool based on publicly available data from the Department for Education, from CAFCAS, and from Ofsted, which helped to draw out more visual comparisons of different local authorities and different designated family judge areas to see how those worked against the baseline and the expected case durations. Throughout our engagement, we used diagnostic questionnaires with all of our stakeholders that were tailored for their needs to make sure we covered as much ground with them as possible, and also undertook a series of case study deep dives with particular court areas to get a more detailed understanding of how those particular areas were working together. It goes without saying, but it required a huge amount of engagement from lots of different stakeholders, as you can see in the middle, and huge numbers of people. And we are incredibly grateful to everyone who has taken part in this project, because we appreciate that you all have incredibly busy jobs. And we really appreciated the time and the input that you provided to this project. The findings would not have been possible without your assistance. So let's jump into the findings that we're seeing here. When we talk about a system in terms of care proceedings, a sensible way to look at it is to look at court areas. This is for a few reasons. It covers a much larger geographic area, which involves a larger base of all stakeholders and partners who are involved in care proceedings, and also includes a really diverse demographic of families. So when we were thinking about the one system, we were thinking about court areas specifically. And what you can see in front of you is the comparison of the national overview of duration in weeks by court areas. As tempting as it is to jump into several ones of these, we're going to just focus on 4 of them in particular, based on some of the findings that we had around their durations, but also the way in which they were operating within their core areas, which we found were really interesting and had some really good examples of success stories in how they were making the one system work for them. As you saw there, the 4 systems that we were looking at were Bournemouth, Coventry, Teesside, and Worcester in there. The data that you see in front of you is taken from our benchmarking tool. And at a first glance, you might think the numbers can only really tell us so much about how they are doing against the statutory limit, the number of disposals, the number of looked after children, and the number of care applications. But once you dig behind these numbers, you start to see some really interesting activities. So starting with Bournemouth at the top there, currently at 33 weeks based on the publicly available data that we had. It was 34 weeks 2 years ago and has held very consistent averages ever since then. In Coventry, it really did spike up after COVID, very understandably, from 49 weeks to 56 weeks. But within a space of a year, it went down to 45 weeks and is aiming to go down even further towards 35, so has really decreased quite rapidly and quite effectively. In Teesside, it is currently at 29 weeks and is continuing to decline and came down from 36 weeks 2 years ago and has continued on that steady decline ever since then. And finally, Worcester at the bottom there, currently the lowest in England at 22 weeks as an average case, which was down from 32 weeks 2 years ago. And as you can see from the visuals there, has held fairly consistently throughout that. You look at these numbers and we already know, and you will already know, that there are a number of very quantifiable factors that affect case duration in any area. This can be the capacity of the courts, judges' availability, social workers' availability in caseloads, CAFCAS availability, demographics involving international cases, the setups of local authority teams and the use of expert assessments, and of course, the late presentation of family members. But the question that we wanted to ask here was, if they are experiencing the same quantitative issues that we all know about, what's going on in these areas qualitatively? This is where the qualitative interviews and the deep dive case studies really came in handy, because that's where the strengths and the challenges started to come out. Throughout these qualitative sessions and the court system deep dives, a number of areas started to emerge that showed what was working really well and what was empowering stakeholders to move towards that 26-week target. They've been grouped and outlined there. I won't read all of them in detail, but you can see that they focus on the system relationships and how those strong relationships between partners or different forums are working, places where everything is very outcome focused and there is a strong personal desire and commitment for good outcomes, processes and practice involving how you make good decisions and how you use data in an innovative way to make decisions, but also that drive at the national level for the public law outline refresh and stakeholders noting that that had really created a different drive and a reset within the system, and stakeholders were starting to work together in a different way to achieve those targets. Naturally, where there are strengths, there are also challenges. Some of these you might think look quite similar in many ways. These are challenges that aren't necessarily just about the capacity and case numbers, although they are involved, but they fall under these 5 areas that are more entrenched in the way in which the systems are operating. So as you can see, starting from the left and moving to the right, there are challenges to do with how we support parents through the process. There are challenges to do with the court arena, its facilities, how it works as a building, how it works for the people who are working in it. There are challenges for the social work workforce, not just their caseloads or their recruitment and retention, but the way in which they experience care proceedings and the way in which they have to work with families before and after care proceedings. There are challenges around external assessments. Naturally, the long wait times, the limited availability, using them where there isn't capacity within a local authority, but also not necessarily tracking or understanding where additional assessments are necessary and therefore adding into the length of the process. And finally, on the right-hand side, around data use and sharing. Although there are examples of really good practice where some authorities and partners are able to share data and use it more innovatively in a different way, it's not a consistent practice. And where it is inconsistent, this does mean that additional delays are added in or additional legal blockers prevent that easy and effective sharing of information. It would be easy at this point to say, well, all we have to do is keep doing what works and fix what isn't working. The question we should be asking ourselves goes one step further and says, what do the strengths and the challenges actually have in common? This is where we come to the one system mindset here. The three areas that you can see there just above the one system mindset are the things that we felt were in keeping with both the strengths and the challenges. They are those strong and trusting relationships. They are those purpose-driven processes and that collaborative system culture, which combined, added together, creates that one system mindset. The one system mindset, for the sake of defining it, we mean it creates the conditions that allows a system to produce a positive change by itself in a sustainable manner, rather than trying to find one silver bullet that makes change happen. Each area that we've outlined there is vital for reducing case duration and making sure that children experience better outcomes in care proceedings. But improving one by itself is not necessarily enough to produce that effective and lasting change. We repeatedly heard under relationships about the importance of not just strong professional working relationships, but personal relationships as well, and the significant impact that they can have on the duration of a case. And this is applicable with stakeholders across the system, across local authorities, wider partners, the judiciary, CAFCAS, and importantly, parents. When thinking about processes and having something that is purpose-driven, we know that there are already several processes in place to help everybody reach that 26-week limit. However, areas for improvement can and should still be identified, such as earlier engagement with parents in the process. And what we uncovered was that it was really critical that systems were able to continually review their processes and determine how effective processes continued to be and make adjustments where that was necessary. And finally, under that collaboration heading, the strength of a system's culture has a really significant impact, not only on the duration of the proceedings, but also on the outcome for children and families. We saw that in areas where there was a really collaborative problem-solving culture at work, for example, where there was a very active LFJB as a problem-solving forum, partners can work together incredibly effectively to identify system trends that need addressing or need to be expanded on an ongoing basis. And as we say, improving and maintaining all three of these has to be the simultaneous focus, where system stakeholders can buy into a holistic problem-solving approach and hold themselves and each other accountable on an equal footing. I mentioned the four core areas earlier. There are four very different ways in which these four areas have approached this one system mindset, and four very different ways in which they have made these incredible success stories and good practice realizations. The important thing to note from these, you can take your time to just read through these and see what's different about all of them. But the important thing to note is that there isn't a set template for how one system thinking and mindsets work. The one system mindset and culture is best deployed when it's designed collaboratively and designed by all parties involved in the system, which naturally means that each example is going to be really unique to that area, and also appreciates that, unfortunately, different areas are going to have different challenges, and there isn't going to be one single way of addressing this. You're not necessarily going to be able to do everything that Bournemouth is doing or that Coventry is doing. But what we would like you to be able to take away from this is something that might work for you, something that you think that's relevant to me, that's something I can do here, and that's what I want to do here. That's where I'm going to stop off there with the findings that we have come across here. Now, unfortunately, we were going to have a presentation from Helen in Teesside, who is a barrister and the chair of the Teesside Local Family Justice Board, to hear about what they are doing in Teesside. Unfortunately, she is still stuck in court. So we are going to switch the order around a little bit, and I'm going to firstly hand over to our wonderful panel of cross-sector representatives. And I'm going to hand over to our chair, Claire Chamberlain, who will be able to introduce the panelists and invite them all to answer some of your questions. So please do start to submit your questions through the Q&A function. And if we have time to return to Helen once she's out of court, we will do so. Over to you, Claire. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. Very smoothly done, given that cancellation of the key speaker, or not cancellation, hopefully just postponement. So let's start with introductions. I'm Claire Chamberlain. It says there I'm the Executive Director of Community and Children's Services. I was till a couple of weeks ago. That was just an interim role. I'm sort of intermittently retired, but my background is in social work, and I was Director of Children's Services in what was the Tri-Borough, Westminster, Kensington and Hammersmith until a few years ago. And I'm doing this work with Mutual Ventures. Shall we introduce ourselves as people are on the screen? So that'll be Chris, Lauren, Rashid and Jackie. Chris, can you go next?
Yeah, of course. Hello, Chris Simmons. I'm the designated family judge for Dorset. I used to be a district judge in the old PRFD in London, and I've always specialised in children law.
Thank you. Lauren?
Hi everyone. Hi, I'm Lauren Coxon. I'm Head of Children's Rights and Family Justice in the Department for Education. We commissioned this great work by Mutual Ventures, and so have been closely involved and really grateful for everyone for all the work they've done to get to this point.
Rashid?
Hi, I'm Rashid Pendry. I'm the Deputy Director of Children's Services in Wandsworth.
Thank you. And Jackie?
Hi everyone, Jackie Frisbee. I'm the Head of Family Justice System Improvement in the Ministry of Justice.
Great, good. So we've got a great panel. We've got represented two of the ministries, Education and the Ministry of Justice, and also local authority from Rashid's perspective in Wandsworth, and Chris as a judge's perspective. So there's a good group of people to answer your questions. I'm going to ask the first question, and then hopefully some of your questions will be coming through, but I'm going to ask each of the panelists to respond to this question. So as I've been watching the work and the findings that Mutual Ventures have been doing, and come up with the same question that we've been asking for 10 or 11 years, which is why as a system, or are we a system? And why as a system are we unable to reduce the length of time that care proceedings take for children, knowing the distress that can cause and the difficulty with placements and difficulty for families generally, but particularly for children. So my question to the panel for each to answer, and maybe we'll do it in the order that we appear on screen, again, to keep it simple, is knowing that we haven't managed to change so far, thinking about a collaborative and one system culture for all of us working together, what would be the first thing you would do to try and get us to move to one system, the first practical step that you take? Chris, can I ask you to start?
Okay, I'm a great believer in going back to basics. And by that I mean identifying at the very start what are the welfare issues in this case, and how are we going to support the family to address them so that the child can return to the family's care. So that I think is the key point, and I don't think we do that at case management. I think we're very much sometimes we get lost in lots of different avenues, and we don't go back to what the key factor is, what's the welfare issue? How can, let's call him Bill, how can Bill go home if Bill isn't at home? And I think that requires a very clear advocates meeting, properly funded, a good few days in advance. People have the opportunity to think about exactly what is the welfare issue in this and how we're going to address it and put the support in. So avoiding perhaps going down avenues or getting experts that just really aren't required, that aren't going to address what the fundamental concern is in this case. So I'm very much going back to basics from the very start.
Thank you. I'm sure, well, it'll be interesting to hear from participants if that's their experience of judges in their area. But thank you, Chris, that's great. Lauren, what will the DFE do?
So, well, I'd like to think we're doing quite a lot, but there's a lot more we need to do. So kind of answering the question of what would the DFE do to get back to one system, I totally agree with Judge Simmons in terms of going back to the basics. That is something that has been lost over a significant amount of time, is going back to the public law outline. And that's something we're trying to drive forward more now, but it is important to recognise that we were at nearly 26 weeks a few years ago in 2014, 2014 to 2016, and we have gone completely in the other direction. So something was working, and what did we do then? Relationships are the most important thing in any system, but particularly this system, which is, Claire's good question, is it a system? It feels like a big system with lots of systems within it. You have the Chief Executive CAFCAS, ADCS, the departments, CAFCAS Cymru, it's a massive system. And I think what I would love to do is have someone at the top, really, to oversee, for everyone to be able to answer to, for that person to hold everyone to account, and have someone at the moment, the judiciary, the departments, CAFCAS, ADCS, they don't have one person kind of at the top there, and that's really difficult to expect people to be able to drive things forwards together when there isn't that kind of leadership. So I would really like that if I had all the power in the world. And then I think going back to relationships, that's the most important thing. I think we are in a good place at the moment with our relationships than we have been for a very long time. And we need to do more with that, to work together to see what we can do to address the various drivers of delay. And thankfully, delay is slowly coming down, but there is a lot more to do.
Thank you, Lauren. That's an interesting point, I think, about leadership, and maybe we'll have some more questions about that. Who are the leaders in the sector in this particular area? Rashid, what is the local authority going to do? Or
So I think it's about getting the practice right in the local authority, so ensuring that we have done everything that we can before we even get into court, in terms of working with the family cooperatively, collaboratively, building effective relationships, family meetings, having family-led decisions about how, to take Chris's point, how can we support this family to look after their child, so that we're coming into court with a very clear and effective plan, which we then build effective relationships with the other professionals in court, with dedicated time outside of the court to deliberately focus on how we can collaborate, rather than invite the kind of adversarial position which often happens and leads to delay, so that we're all working together to secure the best interests of the child in those proceedings. So it's a culture change, and we have to lead the culture change from practice perspective, so that we're clear about what we're doing, why we're doing, and why we're even in court. And then we work with the professionals working with us to develop effective relationships and deliver for children. And that might be by working outside of proceedings, to meet with, we just met recently with our local judges and talked to them about the consistency of judges hearing care proceeding cases is a big change that would work for us and would deliver less delay. So how can we work with judiciary colleagues to deliver that and do as much work as we can collaboratively outside of the courtroom?
Yeah, I like, even though you answered the questions from the local authority, it was very helpful for you to tell us what you needed from judges as well. But I wonder, I know that you've done quite a lot of work on this in Wandsworth. I wonder if you can just give us a bit more of an idea whether you've got fewer children going to court or whether you're having an impact on delay by changing practice in Wandsworth, because I know you've been there a year or so.
Yeah, we've got significantly less children going to court, and when we take them through proceedings, we're very clear about the permanency plan that we want to secure. We've reduced our expert assessments by doing our expert assessments in-house in the pre-proceedings phase, so that we are clear about what we want to do and how we want to do it, and we are developing the skills of our social workers so that their work and their assessments of the families that they know best, stand up to the scrutiny of court.
Okay, great, thank you, that's helpful. And finally, Jackie from the Ministry of Justice.
So I mean, I may just be building on some of the themes that have come up from other panelists, but I think dialogue is absolutely key. So Lauren talked about relationships, and Morgan, you've also referred to it. There's obviously no one single way of tackling these issues. So I think particularly the dialogue between the national leaders of the systems within the system, and then dialogue at a local level. So local practitioners, local family justice boards, and within that, and like Lauren, I think we are doing some things on this that are starting to make a difference, but getting under the skin of the data. So not just looking, if you like, at performance, but really developing a shared understanding of what's driving that and what's working, being much better at facilitating kind of the good news stories and seeing where they can be transposed into contexts that are similar and facing similar challenges. And equally, those areas that are struggling, if we know that there's good practice, sharing really basic information about what is being piloted where, not overloading one single area that has an enthusiastic responder to all the calls that go out for something, although that's great when we get that, but just making sure that we're getting the best evidence in terms of being able to identify what is working, and then scaling that up wherever possible, where the evidence looks like it might improve things for children and families at the end of the day. So I think dialogue is probably the thing that I would add to that.
I'm just looking at the questions that are coming in, and the first one is from Hannah Sampson, which says, is there an issue with communication across the system, including communication with national government? And if so, how can this be improved? So it sounds like Jackie and Lauren, thinking of you two as representing national government here. What have you done? Perhaps you can tell participants what you have done to improve communication between the Ministry of Justice and the Department for Education.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go first, and then Jackie, please do add. I thought you were going to ask me across the whole system with judiciary and everything, but I can certainly focus on DFE and MOJ. So in my opinion, it is miles ahead of where it was before. We talk sometimes daily, at least weekly. Everything we do is joint. We have a cross-system plan where we are all across all our teams in DFE and MOJ are working towards managing down delay to 26 weeks. In that cross-system plan, it's got everything that DFE is doing, everything that MOJ is doing, everything that CAFCAF and the judiciary are doing. We're trying to be completely across system. It could always be better, to be completely honest. You know, it's very difficult. I'm sure Jackie will confirm, you know, when you've got one department who has one interest and one department who has different interests, and you have different ministers and you're trying to please them at the same time. We cover public law, MOJ cover private law, so there's always more we can do to kind of join up more, but I would say it's in a lot better position than it ever has been. I don't know if Jackie would agree.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's much more to add on the DFE MOJ front, but hopefully it's helpful to hear as well that particularly on that national local dynamic that I mentioned in kind of my previous response, like we are putting quite a lot of support around that in terms of better engagement from the departments, from the centre, from the national leaders with the local family justice boards. So we've agreed a kind of programme of engagement that includes, well, we already had regular chairs calls, but conferences where we're going to be doing this shared practice. We've got a virtual one coming up in July. We'll have an in-person one in October, and recognising the need to kind of up that communication across the system. So yeah, between departments, we definitely speak a lot. Obviously, the National Family Justice Pool is chaired between the two departments, and as Lauren said, both the judiciary and CAFCAS are feeding into that plan. So we reviewed the governance structure last year. I won't go into details of that, but all of the partners in the system fed into that governance review. So to get to the point where we could have agreed shared priorities and kind of collective key performance indicators that the system are working towards. So I think communication is definitely improved more broadly than just MOJ and DFE as well.
Good, good. We'll come back in a minute to the local family justice boards because there's a question about that. But I thought if we just move to a question specifically for you, Chris, on how we can, an anonymous attendee, it says, rather than name, how can we ensure more consistency in judicial decision making without sacrificing judicial independence? Currently, it feels like different judges have very different approaches.
Yeah. Well, I can put my hat on because I was one of the directors at the Judicial College, and I taught the care courts, and it's impossible, and it shouldn't be, but it is, because judicial independence is a cornerstone of our democracy. We want it there, and people come from very different backgrounds, and those backgrounds, I think, sometimes influence, and not background as in social mobility or cultural matters, but background as in practice. I'll give you an example. We have a lot of recorders that sit here, and you get the new recorders that come in, and they'll have had no experience whatsoever in family, but they'll have got a care ticket and they've got the law and they're learning their way. They will be very hesitant in the way that they deal with it, because they're finding their wings and they're learning how to approach a case, and so they need a great deal of mentoring through the process, but they will be a lot slower and perhaps come at things in different ways, different thinking to perhaps I would with a lot more experience. So there is no way of dealing with it, and I can say that really honestly, because when I was in practice, I would know that Judge A was slightly more pro-parent, and Judge B was slightly more local authority focused, and Judge C, I'd put my tin hat on and hope for the best by day 3. So I know the reality, and from the Judicial College point of view, we really do, or did, teach a very consistent program. But I'm sorry to say, you've got 2,000 human beings that will hopefully approach things roughly consistently. But there is no magic wand. But I understand the problem. I really do. I mean, locally, we try and have consistency. We chat to each other, the judges, we talk through problems, we talk through cases. So we're very much working as a team. And so hopefully that means that practitioners in Dorset have a consistent approach. But if I was in central London, say, I'd be running 30 judges. It's near enough impossible to get that sort of collegiate atmosphere working in such a close-knit way with, say, 30 judges or 20 judges.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I don't know if any of the other panelists want to comment on that, because I know it's something that comes, it feels, I mean, from the time when I was a social worker, you'd always be mindful about which judge you're going to go in front of, and you kind of have an idea of how your life was going to be in front of some judges and how it would be in front of others, and the case direction. I don't know if other panelists want to contribute. Is that? No, I thought Rashid, you were taking your glasses off, not putting your hand up. Sorry.
Well, that's definitely an issue, which is that's definitely an issue, which is one of the reasons why we are talking to our judges about the consistency of judges for the work across the duration of proceedings, which is better for us, better for relationship building, but most importantly better for the families that are working with us, because they can build their relationship with the relevant judge, knowing that the judge knows them, has taken time to get to know them, and won't change from hearing to hearing.
Okay, thank you. Lauren, you want to come in?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. We did a big deep dive a year or so ago into all of the children that are in the system the longest, so about 3,500 children, and that was one of the issues that came up with kind of judicial consistency. So yeah, definitely something aware of. The president of the family division is very aware of it as well, and it is something that is a live concern that we're trying to address. But absolutely, as Judge Simmons said, these are all human beings who will work in different ways, but there must be, for the kind of big high level things like we see in the north, there's loads of care orders, and in the south hardly any. Well, that's quite a significant thing, so we're looking more into that to seeing how it can be more consistent.
And one of the things that might help with that would be direction from the local Family Justice Board. And we have a question where an attendee's asked, local family justice boards could lead the way. So there's a recognition that they ought to have a leadership role, I think. But how can we assure they're more effective? And I don't know if any of you sit on a local family justice board or have thoughts about effectiveness of the boards. Jackie.
Well, I mean, I can start us off. Firstly, to say some of them definitely are leading the way. I am a sponsor of actually Judge Simmons' local family justice board. So I, for the last couple of years, have sat in on those boards, and honestly was surprised the first couple of times that I went just how on top of the data and how much buy-in there is from a huge range of local partners, always really well attended, people prioritizing it, asking good questions, providing that challenge and collective support to one another as agencies, but also asking themselves a difficult question. So yes, they can lead the way. Some of them do. I think there is a role for us to support those that are struggling, again, by sharing good practice, by getting better data to them that shows them a bit more about what's happening and helping them interrogate that data in a way. So we just the last couple of months have reformatted the data that goes out to local family justice board chairs in a much more user-friendly dashboard that they can look at by their local region and kind of see how they're doing relative to other areas, rather than an unwieldy and big spreadsheet, which extremely busy frontline practitioners and leaders are not necessarily going to find the most useful. So I think there's something around the data, and then some support centrally as well. So I've already mentioned a bit more engagement with the National Family Justice Board. Lord Bellamy is really, so Family Justice, he holds the Family Justice portfolio. He's really invested in local family justice boards. He's happy to meet with them. He's wants a series of roundtables in the diary over the coming kind of 6-9 months where he'll hopefully meet with every local family justice board chair. So I think there's definitely a willingness to do whatever we can. We also just need to hear from them what help they need and how they think they could be more effective, and whether there's things that we can do across the system to support that. So I used to work in local government. I'm certainly of the view that central government pushing policies that have to land and be delivered locally by local agencies it's got to be a two-way conversation, and we need to know what's going to help. So I think those lines of communication are open already.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else? If not, I'll move on to the next question. Paul Baird has asked, one of the potential impacts on delay can be social workers not being seen as experts in their own right. Do the panel think independent social workers are used too much, used appropriately, ? Which can add delay to children? So, Chris, let's start with you and then Lauren.
Okay, I think the role of social workers should be sung from the rooftops, and I spend a lot of time teaching social workers, going along and speaking to either on the degree or social workers just starting with our local authorities and be involved in their training. Not because I want them to be my friends or anything, but I want to go along and say to them 3 things really. Number one, I wouldn't do your job. I think you do an amazing job, and I think it's a really difficult job, and honestly I couldn't do it. Number 2, in that courtroom, the people that know that family best are you. I don't know them. The guardian may have met them once or twice. You will have been in there, out there, up, down, gone to the school. So you need to bring that across. And thirdly, you are experts. I mean, I know what the Act says or the rules, but you qualified, you know what you're doing, you know this family, you've got your views, you've got your professional views as a result of your direct experience. Stick to your guns if you want to stick to your guns, and give me your evidence. And it's in the end, it's for me to decide. So I think it's really important. I think social workers get a bad rep. They go, if something goes wrong, they get, a moan about how poor they are. Whereas the social workers I see day in, day out are going out at 10 o'clock at night, 5 o'clock in the morning, that are, giving mum a cuddle after the end of the case because nobody else is there to do it. And they are really decent, hardworking professionals. And I just think as a group, we need to be going out and saying to them, you're really good. We don't need ISWs. We don't need experts. You people know what you're doing, and really kind of like boost their profession.
In your courtroom, do you find yourself refusing requests for independent social workers?
Yeah, very rarely. And the only time I grant an ISW if it's asked for by the local authority because they don't have the social workers in house, and I'll grant it then because they want it, and they don't have to grant it. They just tell me they're doing it.
Yeah.
Okay. But no, I never grant it.
No, that's fascinating. Lauren.
That's the most refreshing answer I have ever heard from a judge. I wish all judges were like you, Judge Simmons, because I agree with everything you've just said. And it's something we hear a lot from social workers, and generally, most of the time, requests for ISWs are granted. So it's really great to hear that you are different to that. So I been looking forward to answering this question when I saw it pop up. Yes, I do think they're used too much. We do see too many independent social workers requested and granted in court. It delays things, and the expert, as Judge Simmons says, is the social worker that has spent all of that time with the family getting to that point. I agree also on the CAFCAS guardian point. They are the guardian, obviously, but they would have sometimes not even met the child for the case management hearing. Not CAFCAS's fault, but that's kind of the way the system works at the moment. We're trying to change that, and we've just launched a big pilot to get CAFCAS to meet the family and meet the social worker before they go into the case management hearing, so that they understand the journey that the social worker has taken the child on and why they are applying for that application. But yes, I completely agree with everything that Judge Simmons says. Not just independent social workers, I'd say lots of expert assessments aren't necessarily needed in court. That is a massive cause of delay, if not the biggest cause of delay. We are looking into that at the moment. But yeah, I think not just independent social workers, I think other experts as well are requested too much.
Thank you, Lauren. Helen, you've arrived. They've let you out of court.
Eventually, I am so sorry, everybody. It is one of the hazards of the job, I think, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just picking up on the point about independent social workers, I find that quite often we get reports. I say quite often, the same as Judge Simmons, we don't generally use independent social workers, but locally, I think we've had some issues with retaining social work teams and experienced social workers within the local authorities, and it's been a resource issue quite often within the local authority as to, who should do this assessment. And it boils down occasionally to it being an independent, because it's going to be a consistent assessment. But I agree that most of the time, and I have to be careful because we have some very, very good independent social workers, but actually most of the time they don't tell us anything that we don't already know or can't glean from the other evidence or the other workers that have been involved. I think there's been a rise recently in independent social work assessments for us locally, and it's something that we're trying to kind of grapple with and work out why.
Okay, thank you. Morgan, if you're still there, I can't see you on the screen. Oh, there you are. Do we want to hand over to Helen to have her presentation, or have we got time for more questions?
I think we've got time for one more question, and then we will close out the session with Helen's presentation.
Okay, well, let's just stay on independent external assessment. Since the panel have all been one mind, we have got a challenge from one of the attendees who says, does reducing the involvement of external assessors or experts to reach the 26-week target leave too much room for mistakes to occur? Mistakes which cannot afford it to be made. Any views on that challenge? Lauren?
It's a good challenge. And the last thing what I would say is we definitely don't want to go at this from the wrong angle. So we don't want to say don't use independent social workers or expert assessments to get to the 26-week target, because having a target in children's social care is not the right way to go. It's questioning, stepping back, whether this will actually add to the case. So do you need an independent social worker's opinion, or is the social worker that you have in the room enough? Do you need that additional expert assessment, or does the judge have enough to make the decision that they need to make? And so I would look at it from a slightly different angle, that it's questioning if it is going to add to the case and the child's outcomes, or rather than we need to get to a target, so let's not do assessments. We've got to do the right thing for the right child, and if that is an assessment, then you should still have assessments.
Okay, thank you. Before we hand back to Morgan, then, any of the panelists having heard some of the discussion, want to add anything or say anything on any of the questions that we've had that they've suddenly thought of? No? I think we'll hand back to you, Morgan, then, to introduce Helen properly, rather than just, oh, hi, Helen, you're here.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Claire, and thank you all of you for your candour and your openness and frankness about this. It's really appreciated. It gives me great pleasure to hand back to Helen, who's going to start to bring the session that we have here to a close by looking at some of the really good practice that Teesside has got as a family court area. So we're quite excited by what you guys are doing in Teesside, and we'd like to hear a little bit more about what you think really matters for cross-system cooperation in Teesside. So without further ado, over to you, Helen.
Thank you so much. We on Teesside were delighted to be approached to try and assist, really. I think we are quite unique in terms of the way we work. And I've been racking my brains to try and figure out why we do work so well, because there isn't anything in particular that we seem to do. You know, we don't have a list of requirements for people who want to join the board. But what we do have is both myself and our designated family judge, Her Honour Judge Matthews, KC, are very visible to people. We make ourselves known. We communicate regularly with all practitioners. We organise social events and things away from court. And those events include social workers, guardians, lawyers, judges, magistrates, police, the whole board, the whole spectrum. And I think what that does is it breaks down some of the barriers. I think particularly the more junior members of the profession, look at people in authority, if you like, and judges like they're big, scary, you know, that you can't approach them and you couldn't possibly contact them if there was a problem. And I think the way that Judge Matthews and I have kind of evolved, I've only been doing it for 3.5 years, really. But the way that we have evolved is that we have an amazing team around us, and I'll go on to that in a minute. But we try and make sure that all of the practitioners locally know that they can come to us. They can approach us about anything.
Oh, you just muted yourself there, Helen.
Very clever. We have our quarterly meetings, and they're our board meetings, and we usually invite a speaker or somebody, you know, if there's a particular issue locally, we will invite somebody to come and do a little slot. We have very, very consistent attendance, and we have, and I think this is probably where we flourish really. We have a really good core group, if you like. Within my meetings, we discuss things generally. If there are any particular issues that are becoming noticeable, or there are trends, we have constantly, we don't just set them up if we need them, we constantly have a public law subgroup, we constantly have a private law subgroup, and we constantly have a kind of education training type subgroup. And we also had for a period of time a subgroup that involved the police, because there was a huge issue about backlogs in disclosure. But I think the effect of those subgroups is that those subgroups remain the same by and large. So the same people have been in my public law subgroup for 3 years. And I know, you know, the subgroup consists generally, and this is private and public law, somebody from local authority, from each local authority, usually at service manager level, a lawyer from the local authorities, CAFCAS management, me, a judge, one of the judges usually sits on the subgroups. And it's a real collaborative event really, because we all have input, and nobody behaves like they are superior. Everybody rolls their sleeves up and gets on with the task in hand. And I think the benefit of having a consistent group is that their names and faces become known to practitioners locally, and people feel more able to come to us with issues. There was something that was particularly picked up, I think, in terms of this research that's been done and the deep dive that has happened, and that's in relation to the culture really, and again particularly the younger, more junior members of all disciplines feeling uncomfortable and feeling under pressure at court and feeling like people are criticising them. And I think we try really hard to constantly bear in mind people's well-being, and we constantly bear in mind that, you know, these younger and more junior practitioners are the future, so we need to try and support them, to help them, and to give them, I think lockdown has had a huge impact, because previously you'd get a lot of that support at court or in the office, in chambers, you know, when you're around and you're around other more senior practitioners and you can bounce ideas off them. But I think I've tried to make it so that our local family justice board is visible and is, I've tried to work out how to word this, but a one-stop shop really, because we don't just deal with figures and statistics and, you know, how well we're doing at achieving the 26 weeks. We look at making a nice working environment, or as nice as it can be given what we deal with, a nice working environment for everybody. Some of the more junior, and I'm talking CAFCAS officers, barristers, solicitors, social workers, and in fact a service manager contacted me on one occasion to say that one of her social workers had overheard a lawyer or a guardian being critical of them at court. And actually things like that just need to be nipped in the bud. I was really pleased that they felt able to approach me about that. And what I did, I immediately sent an email round to everybody to say, just bear in mind that when we're at court and chatting, things can be overheard. And my email finished by saying, it takes much more effort to be mean to people than it does to be nice. The reason that we work so well is because we all get on, and with, you know, there isn't that kind of competitive backstabby culture at all. It's everybody's in it for the same reason. Everybody's in it because you know, and the same applies, I would imagine, to everybody that's participating this afternoon. Everybody does the job that they do to try and get the best outcomes for the children that are subject to the proceedings. We are incredibly lucky to have Her Honour Judge Matthews Casey as our DFJ, because she is so ambitious, she is realistic, she's approachable, she inspires people. Most of all, she gets down to other people's level, and she you know, quite often sorry I was late for a meeting or a hearing, I've been having a meeting with such and such in the local authority or with the police, and people don't see the work that goes on behind the scenes. But Judge Matthews and me, but certainly Judge Matthews, makes sure that she meets personally everybody that she will be asking to contribute to decision making moving forwards. What that does is then it just opens up a whole line of communication, and it makes I think it just makes it more effective.
Helen, sorry to interrupt in your praise of Judge Matthews. I think we're probably close to the end, and so
yeah, I was just going to finish by saying,
sorry, Helen,
I think really to have a really effective local family justice board, you've got to delegate, and you've got to have people that you trust to delegate to. The way you build the trust up is by working with them and being open and honest, and by, you know, educating people about why it is we're trying to achieve what we're trying to achieve.
Thanks.
Brilliant.
Morgan, thank you very much, Helen. That was really nice to hear, and it sounds like you've got a very collaborative team up there. Morgan, just before you wind up, I don't think the panel will have time to answer this, but I think Sandra's asked twice in the chat. Sandra Beaton has asked, and maybe it's just something to think about for people leaving the webinar. She says, when children in care or care proceedings become involved in the criminal justice system, they are written off. How will this change, and when? So as I say, we haven't got time really to answer it, but it's something to think about, and for all those on the panel to think if that happens in that area, in their area, and if so, to pay more attention to it.
Absolutely. Would this were a two-parter, I would happily use the second session to tackle that question. Unfortunately, I can't, and we have run out of time at the end of this. I want to firstly just draw your attention for everyone who's joined on. Thank you so much. If you want to know more about the project as it's coming to a close, there are some details on the screen in front of you that will be sent around with the slide pack itself once the recording and the slides are ready. And before we dial off, I would just once again like to thank all of our speakers and panelists for joining on today. It is hugely appreciated that you've taken this time out of your day to offer your insights and your views on this. We've really appreciated and valued your contributions to this discussion. And there's more that we could go off on, but we are unfortunately limited in time. So I'll just close off by saying once again, thank you so much, and have a good rest of your afternoons, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Morgan.
Thank you, Morgan.